Great. Very good. Sound. Okay, great. We are live. Fantastic. So, let me please right now share my screen because I have something very important, okay, to show you. Okay, I can share it. Okay, fantastic. I can share right now. Good. So I have a presentation prepared for you, and we're going to be discussing this section with that. Okay, let me share. Great. Well, so here we are. Great, awesome. So, as I had told you, the listening section is very interesting. I've always enjoyed it. Not only teaching it, but also practicing it. It's a very entertaining one because you never get bored, right, of listening to something. And it's always entertaining at least. Difficult, yes, but entertaining. So let us discuss it, okay, together, the TOEFL listening section. Great. So, as it is, as it is our tradition, we're going to be discussing some general aspects with you on this listening section. What could I tell you first? This section, dear students, is going to measure your ability to understand a spoken English, of course, right? Because you're going to listen to a spoken English. Now, it includes listening for two different areas or spheres that are going to be punctuated and evaluated in this particular part of the exam. Those areas or spheres are, first of all, basic comprehension, and secondly, pragmatic understanding. Maybe you are not that familiarized with this one, with the second one, so let me explain it to you very simply. Pragmatic understanding is basically the speaker's attitude and degree of certainty, and also how you connect and synthesize that information. As simple as that. So in these two different areas, you are going to evaluate it when performing on the listening section. All right, basic comprehension and pragmatic understanding too. Now, there are two types of listening items or materials you're going to have to confront during this part of the exam. And those are lectures and conversations, okay? For those of you who are not that much familiarized, let's say, with lectures, lectures are basically classes that are delivered by university professors. And in this case, of course, you're not going to be listening to 1 hour classes or 1 hour and a half classes, but you're going to listen to fragments, some fragments of these classes delivered by actual professors in universities around the world. And certainly, if these are classes delivered in universities, that means that all of these are going to be about academic topics. You could be listening to something related to, I don't know, biology, computer science, astronomy, art. Think about any type of material or subject that could be taught in a university, and that is plausibly something you're going to be listening to in these lectures, okay? And the second type of material is way more simply understandable, and it's conversations, okay? Conversations of two speakers discussing very general topics and, let's say, daily activities, all right? Those are the types of material and items you're going to be listening to. Now, maybe you're wondering, how many of this material am I going to receive? You're going to receive, first of all, from 3 to 4 lectures, okay, in the listening section. There is a variation there, as you can see. I'm going to explain that. And each of these lectures lasts for approximately 3 to 5 minutes, okay? And now, when you listen to each of these lectures, as it happens in the reading section, you're going to have to respond 6 questions per lecture. And as I told you before, dear students, if you are not familiarized with the topic that you are listening to in your lecture, you shouldn't be preoccupied. Why? For the very simple reason that, once again, as it happened in the reading section, here they are not testing your knowledge, your personal and external knowledge on this particular issue or topic. They are testing how well you comprehended the material they provided you with in the lecture you have just listened to. So everything you need to respond to the questions is also going to be located and to be found in the lecture you have listened to. That's the reason why you have to listen very carefully and to take notes if you want, in order to, of course, remember the information later on when you read them, okay? And, well, that is for lectures. What about conversations? How many of them? You're going to receive from 3 to 3 conversations. And once again, from 2 to 3 conversations, as you can see with a variation there, it could be 3 or 2 conversations. And each of these conversations is going to last for 3 minutes, okay? These materials are long, they are extensive, not too much, but they are considerably long, which I think is going to be making a necessity, at least, taking notes on this part of the exam, right? And we're going to discuss tonight how to take notes appropriately and efficiently, by the way, so don't worry about that, okay? Now, also, once again, something very important. Remember, you're going to have to respond to 5 questions per conversation after you listen. So when your conversation finalizes, that, as I say, lasts for approximately 3 minutes, you're going to have to respond 5 questions about that same conversation. And once again, nothing is going to be asked of your own information and knowledge, but what you have received and understood from the material they give you, okay? That's what you are going to be asked about. Very good. That's with regard to the material we have. What about the third part? You can take notes on any audio item throughout the test to help you answer questions. As I told you, taking notes is not an obligation. Your notes are not going to be evaluated, by the way. Nothing punctuates you with regard to your notes or something. And of course, you could take this section without taking notes. Now, is that something recommendable? I wouldn't say so, because our memories are not perfect, right, dear students? So it's not, let's say, the best manner or the best approach to go about responding all this without taking notes. As you listen, okay, as you listen to this material, you're going to have to take your notes, because as your memory is not perfect, you have to come back later on to your memories, to your notes, excuse me, to read them and remember information you have forgotten. Now, maybe you're wondering, when can I take my notes? And the response is very simple. You have to take your notes while you listen to the material. That is to say, while you're listening to your lecture or to your conversation, you have to take notes on that. Why? For the very simple reason that you don't have a separate or a specific time for you to take notes after that. No, you have to take your notes as you listen, while you listen to the conversation or the lecture. You don't have, as I say, a specific or extra time, okay? So please have that in mind. Now, you're going to have from 41 to 57 minutes overall in order to complete the section. And once again, here we have a variation, right? It could be whether 41 or 57. Why? Once again, as we discussed in the last week of classes, in the listening section, we also have the experimental version of the exam. Remember that we talked about this last week, and I told you, right? In the reading section, what I'm going to tell you here, the normal version of the listening section contains 3 lectures and 2 conversations to listen and respond. I repeat, the normal version of the listening section contains 3 lectures and 2 conversations to respond. If you get, and of course, 6 questions per lecture, 5 questions per conversation. Now, if you get the experimental version of the listening section, that means that you're going to get how many? 4 lectures instead of 3, and 3 conversations instead of 2. And of course, the corresponding 6 extra questions per lecture and the corresponding 5 extra questions per conversation. All right? Once again, it's just an increment in the quantity of material you receive, and that's it. That's all you get in the experimental version. And of course, they're also going to increase your time to respond and listen. Instead of getting 41 minutes to listen and respond everything, you're going to get 57 minutes in order to listen and respond everything. Okay? Very important. So please have this into consideration. Now, once again, how do you know if you're going to get the experimental version or not? You cannot know, sadly. It is a completely random and aleatory process that cannot be predicted. So when you go to your test center, you're going to find it out by yourself, or if you take the home IBT version, you are going to find it out by yourself as well. Okay, so, and once again, as I told you, not a good idea if you say, okay, I'm going to go like, oh, and by the way, the extra passage, in this case, the extra lecture and conversation you receive in the listening part are also not going to be used in order to punctuate your performance. Nobody is going to evaluate you with regard to the extra material they give you. Because once again, The only reason why they give you this experimental version is because they want to improve their material, their questions, their mechanisms, etc. But they're not going to use that in order to punctuate you, to evaluate your performance. They're not doing so, all right? So maybe you're tempted to say, okay, so if I know that like the extra passage they give me is not useful, so I'm not going to respond to the fourth passage and that's it. But that is not a good idea, because although you are going to receive an extra passage in the lecture and a conversation, that is to say, an extra lecture and an extra conversation, at the end, dear students, you do not know which of your lectures and conversations is the experimental one. You cannot determine it very easily because nothing in your screen tells you, hey, this is the experimental version or something. Sadly, it doesn't work like that. So please, as I told you, always listen to and respond to each of these passages, lectures, and conversations as good as you can, all right? Respond, listen to them as good as you can, paying attention, and always responding them very much, as I say, very much confidently, but also responsibly, all right? It's very important for you to do that. Now, that's with regards to the general aspects, because the rest I want to show it to you in my simulator. So is there any question with regards to these general aspects? Dear students, something that I could clarify? Daniela or Danilo or Grisel, Arlette, any question with regards to these general aspects? Is there any question?
It was clear, teacher.
Okay, thank you very much, Grisel. Great, so if there are no other questions, let us go to the simulator to show you then how it works, okay? How this works on the actual exam. And it's a very important thing because there's a difference with regard to the, or when compared to the reading section that I want to show you, okay? So let me access the simulator. Let's go to the listening part and let us see what happens here, okay? Let me show you. Start a session. So, well, what happens when you come to the listening section? First thing you receive, of course, the material to listen to. In this case, notice the first material that is appearing on my screen is a conversation. And this responds to a question you probably made to yourself. What about the order of my passages? Am I going to receive all my lectures first and then all my conversations? Or it's going to be all right? And the response is, it is going to be all right. That is to say, you could receive, for example, all your lectures first and then your conversations, or you could receive them mixed up. That is to say, a conversation and then a lecture, a conversation and then a lecture. And at the end, dear students, think about it. The order in which you received all these things is simply irrelevant, because at the end, you're going to have to respond to each of this material, to each of the passages you're getting, whether they are lectures or conversations. So the order is simply irrelevant, okay? Just listen and respond to what they give you. Doesn't matter the order you receive it. As I say, could be lecture, 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 conversation, conversation, or it could be lecture, conversation, lecture, conversation, lecture. Doesn't matter, okay? It's totally aleatory and random. In this case, the first material, as you can see, is a conversation, because it says here, listen to a conversation between a student and her professor. I want to right now click just in order to show you, first of all, the length, right? In this case, this conversation lasts for approximately 4 minutes, right? Very interesting, because as I told you, like, these passages are large, okay? And this conversation lasts for approximately 4 minutes, and lectures last more. They last 5, sometimes 5.5 minutes. So it's important for you to know that, okay? That these passages are extensive, and you need to be prepared to listen to them and take your notes as you listen and while you listen, for the very simple reason that you're not going to have the chance to listen to them once again. That's what I wanted to tell you. You can listen to this lecture, well, in this case, to this conversation once and never again, okay? So there is no like a second chance to listen to something if you were not able to understand a particular word, or if you were deconcentrated or something. Sadly, you cannot listen to any of this material twice, merely once. And by the way, notice that in this case,
a conversation,
I am reproducing and pausing the conversation. But on the exam, dear students, you cannot do that. You cannot move here the reproduction bar as you prefer, or go back, or go farther and pause it. You cannot do it. The computer automatically reproduces, okay, for you, the lecture, in this case, or the conversation, and it doesn't stop until the end. It goes straight to the end. Therefore, as I say, you cannot pass it or you cannot repeat it. That's what happens on the exam. You have to prepare for that, and you have to take your notes and be absolutely concentrated in comprehending and internalizing what you listen to in this lecture, okay? Because as I say, no chances to listen twice. Very good. So after you listen to this completely, because as I say, the computer reproduces this and reproduces this until the end, it goes straight up to the end. And when you finalize listening, the computer is going to show you this. The questions. As I told you, per conversation, you have to respond 5 questions, and per lecture, 6 questions. So in this case, we didn't listen, but we had a conversation, right? So in this case, we're going to have 5 questions for this conversation we didn't listen. The first thing I want you to notice here on my screen is that the questions are once again multiple choice. Look at them. You have to merely choose the response you consider to be correct. Now, if you think about this, dear students, you are not going to be you're not going to be having the necessity to write down your response or typing your response, okay? You are not requested in this particular part of the exam, once again, to type anything. You only have to use your mouse to click on the response you consider to be appropriate and correct, okay? And that is the same for all the questions that are going to come. Doesn't matter if you are talking about a lecture or a conversation, okay? Just multiple choice, choosing the correct response within a set of possible answers, okay? So what's next? You remember when I told you in the last part of the our classes last week, the one of the things I enjoy about the reading section was that they gave us the liberty to administer our time. Sadly, in the listening section, that is not repeated. You remember that I told you here, I'm going to come back to my presentation. If you receive the normal version of the listening section, you're going to get 41 minutes in order to respond and listen to all this material. In the experimental version, you get 57 to listen and respond. Now, doesn't matter what version or modality you receive. In this case, dear students, you are not the person who is going to administer your time. ETS is going to give you a particular time to respond to each of these questions. For example, notice here that on my screen there is a chronometer, right? In this superior corner, but this is not going to be appearing on the exam, okay, dear students? As I told you, this is merely a simulator. It is a good simulator, but it's not perfect. This is not going to be happening on your exam. In the listening section, you don't get a chronometer that tells you, hey, 45, 44, 43, respond. No, nothing tells you how much time you have for responding this question. Now, of course, we've made our calculations, and approximately, dear students, listen to this very well, per question, ETS gives you 45 seconds to read and respond the questions. I repeat, per question, ETS gives you the maximum time of 45 seconds to read and respond the question, okay? They do not share this information. They do not tell how exact or how much exact time we get for responding each of these questions, but making our calculations is approximately 45 seconds, okay? Now, as I say, you have 45 seconds per question. That means that, for example, if you are in the first question like this one, and you find this one to be super simple to respond, and in 10 seconds, you are very sure that this is your correct response, so you click it and you say, okay, want to go to the next question. What do? You press next. And for this second question, you are going to have, once again, 45 seconds. Now, maybe you are tempted to say, hey, but in the last question, I merely used 10 seconds. Wouldn't you give me more time to respond to the second question? And the answer is no. They don't give you more time. They give you 45 seconds for each of these questions, and that's all the time you get. It doesn't matter if you do not use it entirely. You can use the 45 seconds entirely if you want, but if you respond, for example, this question in 10 seconds, and in the next one, you found the question more difficult, and you would like to get more time, sadly, you cannot. Once again, the minimum is always, or the maximum, is always going to be 45 seconds. So as you can see, you don't have the chance to administer your time in this case. They give you a very limited and already determined quantity of time for responding each of these questions, okay? 4 or 5 seconds as a maximum. If you respond before than that, faster than that, for example, in 15 seconds, and you don't want to be in this question anymore, you press next, okay? Now, If you don't respond, or if you responded, but you didn't move to the next question in 45 seconds, the computer is going to take you automatically to the next question. For example, imagine that you stay here for 45 seconds, you chose this one, in the second 44, 45, then the computer is going to take you to the next question. Okay, that's what happens. Now, as you can see, there is another important difference with regard to the reading section. There is no button that says previous. You remember that one of the beautiful things about the reading section was that we were super independent and we could go back, go farther, etc. Not the case anymore. As you can see here, we don't have a button that says previous, which means that, for example, if we say, okay, I'm not sure about this one, but I'm going to press next and I'm going to come back later, not possible. Okay, sadly, you cannot do that because as you can see, the only thing you can do is to go next, but to go back, you cannot do so. Okay, so please have that in mind. And there's another important consequence of this, and that's that. Think about it. If you cannot go back, it is a terrible idea to leave questions in blank. To say, all right, I'm not sure about this one. I'm going to leave it in blank. I'm going to come back later. Terrible idea because you cannot go back. Okay. So once again, my honest recommendation, always choose an answer. Okay. Doesn't matter if you're not sure. If you're not sure, if you say, okay, I'm between the first one and the second one, not sure, always go for one of them. Choose it as fast as you can, even if you are not very much confident, as I say. Why? Because, dear students, there is no a penalty for wrong responses. If you get it wrong, the worst thing that's going to happen is that they are going to ignore it. It's just going to be remaining neutral. But if you get it right, of course, more points to you, right? So you cannot lose, basically. You go, you guess, and if you get it, fine. If you don't get it, well, who cares? It's not going to affect you negatively. You're not going to be penalized or something. No, they just, as I say, count the correct responses, the right responses. So you can always go and guess and never leaving something in blank because, as I say, you cannot go back. All right, very important. So what happens when you come to the last question? As I told you, we have 5 questions to respond per conversation. What happens when we come to the last question? What happens is that, well, we are going to be, in this case, going to the next question. Let me show you very quickly. Okay. So this is the last question of the conversation, right? So we choose the correct answer. And if you press next or the computer takes you to the next menu, this is going to appear on your screen. Look at it. Is the next material you have to listen and then to respond. Once again, this is a conversation. It says listen to a conversation between a student and her professor. It's not a lecture, which means that at some point later in the future, we're going to have to listen to the lectures. For now, ETS is just giving us conversations, but doesn't matter because, as I say, if you get the normal version of the listening section, you're going to have to respond and to listen to 3 different lectures and 2 different conversations, yes or yes. So there's no chance you're not going to be responding to something. Always you're going to respond and listen to. So the order is simply irrelevant, okay? What happens when you finalize listening to this? Once again, the computer takes you to the questions for that new conversation you're going to listen to, right? In this case, question 1, and you repeat, etc., until you finalize all the material, right? The 3 lectures and the 2 conversations in the normal version, and the 4 lectures and the 3 conversations in the experimental version. Okay. Is there any question, dear students, with regard to the menu of this section? Something that I could clarify? Please tell me. Questions, dear students, about this? Daniela, Cristel, Danilo, or Arlette, questions with regard to this part of the exam?
No question, listen.
Okay. Thank you very much, dear Arlette. Fantastic. What about the rest of you guys? No questions about anything we have discussed until this point? Okay, Grisel has a question. Please, dear Grisel, go ahead.
Yes, teacher. I would like to know if there are some questions that are multiple choice answers that has multiple choice answers.
All right. Thank you very much, dear Grisel. Fantastic. Very good question. And yeah, the response is yes. There are some questions that instead of asking you to choose merely one response, they're going to ask you to choose 2, maybe 3. And I'm going to, I'm going to be talking about that, okay? I'm going to be talking about that, and we're going to be discussing that tomorrow, because we're going to be discussing the types of questions in the listening section. And as we did in the reading part, we're going to be analyzing the whereabouts and, of course, the municipality of every single type of question. And there I'm going to explain that in detail and very much in depth. But yeah, responding to the question, there are some particular questions in the listening section that ask you to choose more than one response. But as I say, all of them are multiple choice in the sense that the only thing you do is choosing, right? You never write your responses. Is that fine, dear Grisel?
Yes, teacher, thank you.
My pleasure. Very good. Okay, so if there are no more questions, then we're going to come back to my presentation, because there are other very important details that I want to discuss with you before we finalize tonight. Okay, so as I told you, something that represents a very important skill in this part of the exam is taking notes. Why? Because these lectures and conversations are long. As you saw, they last more than 4 minutes, right? Lectures sometimes 5.5 minutes, so it's considerable. You're gonna have to listen to this, and you're gonna have to remember what you listen. And as I say, first of all, because our memory is not perfect, and secondly, because you're gonna be listening to a lot of material, it's gonna be super difficult to remember all. So what can you do in that case? Taking notes, all right? So let us discuss some general principles and recommendations I have for you in order to take very efficient notes and to make a very good use of your paper, and of course the space you get for taking notes. Okay, I want to explain all those details right now. So let us get into that. First thing I want to tell you. Okay, so to begin with, dear students, don't forget that all the sheets of paper and pencils you will need to take your notes will be provided to you by your test center. Now, this only applies to you if you're planning to take the TOEFL IBT version. We discussed this in our introductory class. There exist different types of modalities in the TOEFL exam, and we said that the IBT version requires you to go to a test center in order to take the exam. And when you go to this test center and you go for this modality, you don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to worry about the computer. You don't have to worry about the keyboard, the mouse, the connection, the headphones, the microphone, nothing. Everything you need, the test center you have chosen is going to provide you with, okay? And that also includes the material to take notes, sheets of paper, pencils, erasers, if it is necessary. So everything you need is going to be provided to you by your test center, all right? Now, what else? If you're taking the home IBT version, it is a totally different story, okay? Why? Because in this case, dear students, when you're taking the home IBT version, you cannot actually use sheets of paper and pencils to write down your notes. Instead of that, when you are taking the home IBT version, your test reviewer is going to ask you to get a whiteboard. You know what is a whiteboard, right? A whiteboard is basically una pizarra blanca. These ones that are super popular nowadays, right? In the universities, professors utilize them in order to write ideas, to make some assignments, to do activities, etc. You need to get one of these whiteboards, and not any type of whiteboard. You cannot get one of these very large whiteboards. You need to get a very small whiteboard, a desktop, tamaño de escritorio, a desktop whiteboard, and to use that surface and material to take your notes. And of course, if you're using an erasable board, or excuse me, a whiteboard, you're gonna get erasable marker, because that is the material you use in order to take notes on that particular surface, right? Erasable marker for whiteboards. And as you can see, that of course represents a difficulty in your exam if you're taking the home IBT version, because when you have this erasable marker, as they are very much thick and you have to use it in order to write, you're gonna be using a lot of space. And you're gonna take a lot of notes, trust me. And if your whiteboard is a small desk, excuse me, it's a small desktop whiteboard, that means that you're gonna be able to write a very limited quantity of notes. And if you come to the scenario in which you don't have more space for writing your notes, you're going to have to erase what you wrote previously, of course, right? In order to continue writing more notes. So personally, it's a very difficult thing to approach. Now, if you can go and get over this, fantastic. Take this version, okay, a modality. But all these things should be taken into consideration when deciding what modality to choose, and also, of course, when preparing for the listening section, because as I say, your notes must be taken on this small desktop whiteboard if you want to take it like that in the IVT version, home edition. And if you go to the normal IVT version, to a test center, you don't worry because they're going to give you a piece of paper, a pencil, and also, of course, eraser if you need it. Okay, very good. Now, second thing, what you can do to save time and maintain order is to prepare your sheet with some points marking the beginning of each note, or your whiteboard if you're taking the home IVT version. Let me show you what I mean. So when you get your surface, always a wide surface, right? The first thing you do, my recommendation would be, try to mark some points in 2 different columns to take your notes. Why? First of all, to maximize the space you have on your sheet of paper. Secondly, because remember, you're using these notes because in the future, you're going to be asked some questions. And those questions are going to be about the same data and information you received in those passages. So you want to use your notes to come back, to read them once again, and to remember what you listened to. So as you want to do this very rapidly, because as I said, you have 45 seconds to respond to each question, something very important is organization. And if you organize your sheet of paper like this, having, as I say, some markers, some signs that tell you, hey, you're starting a note here and you're ending it here, you can read them super rapidly and discard the notes that you know are simply useless to your purpose to respond to that question, right? So please try to make something like this. You can change the sign, the symbol if you want. It's totally fine. At the end, the idea, as I mentioned, is to have these markers telling you where are your notes starting and where are they ending, okay? Very important. Now, what else? Further, try not to be very extensive, dear students, with any of your notes. Write down just general ideas as concisely as you can. You are not listening to write. Remember, you're writing to remind what you have listened. I think this is a very common confusion. People believe that notes are going to be evaluated, so they pay a lot of attention and prioritize that. But no, your notes are not going to be evaluated. The only thing that is evaluated is your performance, your responses on the exam, okay? So don't worry if you make very ugly letters, if you're writing in a very curvy manner, or if you're writing like in circles, not very straight, it's fine, okay? Not important. Don't try to make it look perfect because it's not going to be qualified. And second, do not make notes your priority. Because remember, what is the legitimate use of notes? To remember. But how can you remember something if you were not paying attention in order to write notes? People sometimes do not pay attention to the listening or do not pay attention as good as they could because they are super concentrated in writing their notes. But that is absurd. Because remember, you could take this part of the exam without taking notes and just by listening and internalizing. The reason why we're taking notes is as a security procedure, that if we forget something in the future, we come back and remember what we listened and understood. So your priority, dear student, must always be to listen and internalize what you're listening, because that way, if you need to, you're going to come back to your notes and it's going to be super easy to remember rapidly. So always make your priority listening to the lectures and conversations and then internalizing that, okay, on your mind. Very important. Now, next recommendation I have for you. What is? Let me hear, sorry. Next recommendation I have for you. You should write down, dear students, only information words and leave out function words in your notes. Let me explain what I mean by information words. What I mean by information words, dear students, is words that when you listen to them or when you read them, transmit an idea very much immediately. For example, if I tell you the word mirror, I repeat, if I tell you the word mirror, what comes to your mind? Well, a piece of furniture we use in order to look ourselves, right? In order to look at our reflect, because we're trying to see how we look like, to look at ourselves, as I say. That's a mirror, right? Something that you're using in order to look at yourself. And you think about it and you have it on your mind when you listen or when you read that word mirror. And that's because that is an information word. Information words are those words that are meaningful and contain significance. They represent ideas, people, places, actions, descriptions. If I say, for example, house, what comes to your mind? A construction, a building, right? That helps for the purpose of living in and surviving. If I tell you battle, what comes to your mind? Fighting, right? Or if I tell you sofa, what comes to your mind? Something to sit on, right? Ideas that represent something in particular very objectively. Those are the words you want to include in your notes. What is the contrary to that? The antithesis, it's very difficult to say that word in English. The antithesis, the antithesis of that particular concept, information words, are function words. And function words, it's something that you do not want to include in your notes. What are function words? Function words are things like prepositions, articles, auxiliary verbs, modals like may, could, like have, which provide almost no useful information about the material. I'm going to write down a word here in the chat. If I write this word, that, what comes to your mind when you read it? Nothing in particular, right? Because that is a function word. You can use it as a connector, you can use it as a preposition, you can use it as a modal. I mean, there are so many applications of that word that doesn't actually convey a particular idea. And the reason it's very simple, because that word is not designed to represent an idea, but is designed to embody, to make our writing and reading systems complex, to make them, I don't know, complete, perfect, to make them balanced, to make them a scholar. That's the reason why we have invented all this type of words, to make our language more complex and intelligent. But in a very basic level, we are trying to remember things right now. Function words are simply useless and disadvantageous. Why? Because remember, the only usage you are trying to give to your notes is not to make them a beautiful piece of art with regard to writing. No, wait for the writing section to come to that part and say, okay, I want to display my abilities to write. No, in this part, our notes must be super basic because we are using them to remember, and that's it. So use only information words. Let me give you an example. Look at my screen. On the right side, there is a sentence. And imagine that you listen to the sentence in one of your lectures about psychology, for example, and you listen and it says, insomnia, a consistent difficulty in falling or staying asleep, is the most common of these sleep disorders. If you listen to this in one of your lectures and you consider this is something you want to take notes on, how could you take notes on this? Three simple words. Look at it. Insomnia common disorder. It is below the sentence. Insomnia common disorder. That could be your note. No more than that. Insomnia common disorder. Why? The three of those words are information ones. Are information words because all of them represent an idea that comes to your mind immediately. Insomnia, hey, person who cannot sleep. Common, I don't need to explain, right? Disorder, right? I don't need to explain that either. All of them give ideas clearly, rapidly. And that is what you need to remember what you listen to, right? So notice that I could have written, insomnia is the most common of all disorders. But instead of writing all those function words like is, the, most, like words that are not important because they are function words, they do not actually convey an idea, I'm writing just three words, insomnia common disorder. Because with those three words, I am fully able to remember what I listened to and I internalized before. That's the reason why I told you your priority must be listening and internalizing what you listen to, not actually taking your notes, because the only reason why you take this is to remember. And how can you remember if you have not internalized? Okay, so please have that in mind. Another example could be, for example, this second sentence, or the third one. Chronic insomnia is almost always associated with feeling overtired and may be associated with symptoms of depression. How could you take notes on that? Chronic symptoms, overtired, depression. When you read this, you say, okay, when somebody's going through chronic insomnia, He could have some symptoms of feeling overtired and depression. All these things come to you. Why? Because you are reading those 4 words you wrote. Instead of writing chronic insomnia provokes symptoms of overtired, depression, and I mean, all those words like of, like did, like and, are words that you do not actually need, right, to remember. So please, take this into consideration. Try to write down your notes without function words, but merely laying down information words, okay? And the last recommendation I have for you, sorry, it doesn't move. Last recommendation I have for you, it's here, okay? Try to write down abbreviated words. This is very important. Now, that is all the recommendation actually, but maybe you are wondering, how could I abbreviate my words? Here you have a technique. You remember the difference, dear students, between consonants and vowels? Vowels consist of letters as, for example, A, E, I, O, and U, and sometimes Y. Consonants, on the other hand, are all the other letters like B, C, D, F, and so on. Here's the interesting part. Vowels are so common in English and in Spanish that you could write a word without any of its vowels and still understand the meaning. Trust me. Because as I say, vowels are merely, once again, functionary. They help us to make words clear. But given that we are listening to something and we want to remember it, we can simply abbreviate our words without including vowels, like these ones. If you would like to take notes and include the word sleep, instead of writing the entire word sleep, S-L-E-E-P, you could write S-L-P. And you'll be able to understand it because, as I say, vowels are merely functionary. They work as functions. They are ornamental, let's say, but they are not elementary to understand the word. Symptoms, once again, S-M-P-T-M-S instead of S-Y, right? Depression, D-P-R-S-N, okay? And for example, don't hesitate to throw in a vowel sometimes when you have a word that you will not understand without one. For example, if you say, I couldn't understand anxiety, if I merely write down M-X-T, then write A-M-T-Y. Or for example, create, instead of writing R-E-A-T, you can write C-R-E-T-E, right? Or treaty, T-R-T-Y, right? You can throw in a vowel whenever you want. It's okay. The thing is that you can remember and understand the word. As far as you can understand it, it's a very good abbreviation. And you can actually come up with any other technique, dear students. I've had very intelligent and ingenious people in these classes that have told me that the way they have, for example, abbreviated their words is by merely writing half of the word. For example, if they have to write symptoms, they only wrote syms. Or if they had to write depression, they only wrote depress. Or if they had to write sleep, they only wrote sleep. Or anxiety, angst, or create, right? I mean, as I say, any technique you can come out with in order to abbreviate your words, trust me, it's going to be super effective. Why? First of all, because this saves time. You're going to write way easier and rapidly. And also, this prevents you from getting too obsessed, obsessed with the writing and the spelling of your words. Because some people, for example, when they're taking notes and they notice that they have committed a mistake in its orthography, they erase and correct it, and they lose something of the lecture or the conversation because they are super worried about writing correctly. But as I say, nobody's going to punctuate your notes. Therefore, you shouldn't worry about the orthography of your notes. In this case, no. You're going to worry about your orthography and your grammar when you come to the writing section. But here, it's totally unnecessary to worry about that in your notes, okay? So as I say, please try to abbreviate your words as good as you can by the means you can. And trust me, this is going to improve the efficiency and the organization of your notes as you cannot believe, okay? So is there any question with regard to any of these particular techniques or any consult you would like to make? Please tell me. Questions here, students? Is there any question? Dear Daniela, Grisel, Arlette, Danilo, questions?
It was clear, teacher.
Okay, thank you very much, Grisel. What about the rest of you guys? Is there any question with regard to this?
So far, so good, teacher. I don't have questions.
Okay, thank you very much, dear Daniela. Great, very good. So if there are no questions, then we're going to finalize here, okay? But I want to show you this anyways. Tomorrow, we're going to be discussing, as I told you, the different types of questions you will find in this section. So please don't miss tomorrow's class, because when we practice this later on during the week, trust me that understanding the pattern behind these questions is very important, okay? So please don't miss tomorrow's class. We're going to discuss the types of questions. And as you notice in the reading section, understanding those patterns systematically is of essential importance for you to perform well in the practices later. Okay, so please, I see you tomorrow very early. And before you go, let me please state your assistance. And you can also, of course, help me with your kind responses to our traditional poll. Okay, so please help me with that. I'm going to launch it as I do this. And if you have any commentary or question, please let me know. I'm going to be super much glad to help you. All right, so please listen to your names. Say present. Okay, here we are. Form. And here we are. Great. Okay, so it's here present. Our dear Grisel Paz.
Yes, teacher, present.
Thank you very much, dear Grisel. What about Daniela Lourdes?
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much, dear Daniela. What about Liliana Sonia? Okay, what about Danilo Torrico?
I'm here.
Thank you very much, dear Danilo. What about Arlette Gabriela?
Present.
Thank you very much, dear Arlette. Fantastic. And finally, we have Daniela Castellanos. Okay, very good. So, okay, thank you very much, guys, for your presence tonight, for your kind responses too. I'm going to be seeing you tomorrow then to continue with our learning of these theoretical aspects. Please start to be very early, and thank you very much, okay? See you tomorrow. Have a fantastic night.
Thank you, teacher. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye, guys.